Throttling up, 3 engines now to 104%.
Challenger, go at throttle up.
Challenger, go at throttle up.
1 minute 15 seconds. Velocity 2,900 feet per second. Altitude 9 nautical miles. Downrange distance 7 nautical miles. Flight controllers here looking very carefully at the situation. Obviously a major malfunction. We have no downlink. We have a report from the flight dynamics officer that the vehicle has exploded. Flight director confirms that. We are looking at checking with the recovery forces to see what can be done at this point. Contingency procedures are in effect. We will report more as we have information available. Again, to repeat, we have a report relayed through the flight dynamics officer that the vehicle has exploded. We are now looking at all the contingency operations and awaiting word from any recovery forces in the downrange field.
Flight of the Space Shuttle Challenger on Mission 51L, the 25th flight of the Space Shuttle program, began at 11:38 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on January 28, 1986. It ended 73 seconds later in a structural breakup of the external tank and orbiter, in which the 7 crew members perished. The solid rocket boosters continued in flight and were destroyed by the range safety officer 110 seconds after launch. The delivery and assembly of 51L launch vehicle components began months prior to launch. The solid rocket booster segments were transported by rail to the Kennedy Space Center. The SRBs were inspected and partially assembled at the rotation, processing, and storage facility. The segments were then moved to the Vehicle Assembly Building, or VAB, where they were stacked on the mobile launch platform. The external tank arrived at KSC by barge and was moved into the VAB, where it was checked out and mated to the stacked solid rocket boosters. After orbiter checkout, Challenger was rolled into the VAB and mated with the assembled external tank and SRBs. The STS-51L vehicle was transported from the VAB to the launch pad on December 22, 1985. At a crawler speed of approximately 1 mile per hour, the journey takes about 6 hours. The launch was rescheduled several times, resulting in the final countdown on January 28, 1986. The weather was forecast to be clear and cold, with temperatures dropping into the low 20s overnight. The fueling of the external tank began at 1:25 a.m. Ice had accumulated on the launch pad during the night. Several water systems were opened slightly and allowed to flow into drains. The drains froze and caused overflows. High wind gusts spread the water over large areas and ice formed. The air temperature at launch was 36 degrees Fahrenheit. This was 15 degrees colder than any previous launch. At T-minus 7 minutes and 30 seconds, the ground launch sequencer began retracting the crew access arm. The arm can be put back in place within 15 to 20 seconds if an emergency arises and the crew must evacuate the pad. At T-minus 3 minutes and 15 seconds, gimbal checks of the orbiter main engines were performed. All 3 engines move in a pre-programmed pattern to verify ascent flight control. The gimbal sequence ends with the engines in their start positions. At T-minus 2 minutes and 55 seconds, external tank liquid oxygen pressurization began and main engine purging was completed. At T-minus 2 minutes and 50 seconds, retraction of the gaseous oxygen vent hood began. The ground launch sequencer verified its full retraction at T-minus 37 seconds. Sound suppression water was started at T-minus 16 seconds. At T-minus 8 seconds, hydrogen igniters were turned on to burn off any free hydrogen. 6.6 seconds before launch, Challenger's liquid-fueled main engines were ignited in sequence and run up to full thrust. Thrust from the main engines bends the shuttle stack. When it returned to vertical, the solid rocket boosters ignited. At T0, the hold-down bolts were explosively released. After the initial pre-release twang motion, structural forces on the assembly are dissipated through vibration at a rate of 3 cycles per second during the first few seconds of flight. Roll maneuver was initiated at 7.724 seconds. The maneuver was completed at 21.124 seconds.
Normal throttles, most of the flight, 104%. We'll throttle down to 65.
The main engines were throttled back to 65% at 35.379 seconds for about 16 seconds in order to alleviate loads during maximum dynamic pressure.
Velocity 2,257 feet per second. Altitude 4.3 nautical miles. Downrange distance.
The engines were then throttled up to 104% at 51.919 seconds.
Now to 104%.
Challenger, go at throttle up.
During the flight, telemetry data gave no indication of problems.
1 minute 15 seconds. Velocity 2,900 feet per second. Altitude 9 nautical miles. Downrange distance 7 nautical miles.